They talk about you when you're not in the room because they lose control the moment you are. Let that settle. That single truth already exposes what they avoid admitting out loud. If you didn't matter, your name wouldn't travel without you. If you were insignificant, no one would feel the need to conceal their curiosity. Silence is reserved for what gets ignored. The fact that you're spoken about in whispers means you shifted the atmosphere itself. Think of a stage under a spotlight. Light doesn't chase attention, it simply exists, and everything else naturally turns toward it. That's what your presence became. You didn't have to announce yourself. You didn't seek validation or permission. You just showed up as yourself. And the moment that happened, conversations began forming in places you were never invited into, not because you were loud, but because you couldn't be overlooked. Here's something people rarely want to accept. Human attention is deeply tied to emotional impact. The mind holds on to names, faces, and actions that trigger feeling long after neutral moments disappear. So when your name keeps resurfacing, when your actions are observed, when your progress is quietly tracked, it isn't random. It means something in you activated a response. Admiration, discomfort, curiosity, envy, reflection, they all prove the same thing. You weren't ignored. Listen closely here. You didn't become the focus by chasing it. You became it the moment you stopped reducing yourself to fit into expectations. The moment you stopped over-explaining. The moment you stopped seeking approval. That stillness, that refusal to shrink, created more impact than any attempt to be seen ever could. And if this message is resonating with you right now, take it as confirmation that you already know this feeling. Thank you for being part of this force that moves truth forward. Now, let's continue back to the truth they're hiding. People don't talk this much about someone they've moved on from. That's a lie they repeat to themselves. Real detachment is quiet. What you're seeing is fixation, pretending to be distance. They replay your words. They reinterpret your actions. They fill in gaps with stories because not knowing drives them crazy. You may have noticed it. The sudden cold looks, the awkward energy when you walk into a room, the way conversations pause then restart once you leave. That's not coincidence. That's adjustment. People recalibrating around a presence they didn't expect to feel so strongly. When you were quiet, healing, rebuilding, staying low, nobody cared. You blended in. You were safe to ignore. But the moment your energy shifted, the moment you started moving differently, thinking differently, carrying yourself with certainty, you became a reference point. People started measuring themselves against you without asking your permission. And here's the uncomfortable part for them. They can't figure you out. You didn't follow the usual script. You didn't collapse when you were supposed to. You didn't beg when they expected you to. You didn't chase when they pulled away. That breaks people's internal math. When something doesn't add up, they keep staring at it. You're not the center of conversation because you're perfect. You're the center because you're different. And difference disrupts comfort. It exposes insecurities people didn't know they were avoiding. So they talk, they speculate, they project, they pretend they understand you while secretly studying you. Ever notice how rumors often say more about the speaker than the subject? When they twist your story, it's usually because the real version threatens them. When they minimize you, it's because they feel small standing next to what you've become. When they criticize your growth, it's because it reminds them of the work they didn't do. The universe doesn't spotlight people by accident. Attention follows impact. Energy responds to contrast. You became a contrast. Calm in chaos. Grounded where others panic. Focused while others drift. That makes people uncomfortable, and discomfort demands an outlet. Conversation becomes their release. You didn't steal attention. You attracted it by alignment. You didn't chase relevance. You embodied it by living honestly. And now, whether they admit it or not, you live rent-free in places you've never even visited. This isn't about ego. This is about awareness. Knowing that you're being talked about doesn't mean you inflate yourself. It means you move smarter, quieter, more intentional. You don't react to noise. You recognize it as proof of presence. Because the truth is simple. If you weren't the center of conversation, there would be no effort to hide it, no side glances, no updates passed quietly, no watching from a distance. Attention always leaks, and right now, yours is everywhere. So stay steady, stay observant, and most importantly, stay you. What you're witnessing isn't hostility, it's gravity, and gravity doesn't ask for permission. And before we go any further, pause for a second. If you're still here, that already says something about you. People who aren't part of the conversation never stick around this long. So, thank you, chosen one, for staying present. If this message is already clicking, show it some love by liking and subscribing. That simple move pushes this truth into more rooms, more screens, more quiet minds that need to hear it. Drop a comment with 777 if you're ready to understand why your name keeps coming up when you're not around. And if you feel like supporting the team behind this message, super thanks helps keep these conversations alive. It's not about the amount, it's about momentum. Every bit keeps the signal moving forward. Now, here's the transition you need to feel. What comes next isn't surface-level motivation or recycled talk. We're about to break this down step by step, calmly, clearly, and without the noise. If you really are the center of conversations you never joined, you'll feel a pull to stay until the end. Not curiosity, recognition. This is where patterns start making sense, where silence explains itself, where the hidden attention finally becomes obvious. So, stay with me. We are just getting started, and walking away now would mean missing the part that explains everything you've been feeling, but couldn't quite name. Number 1. You're the reflection that shatters their comfort. You didn't break their world. You exposed how fragile it already was. That's the truth they choke on. They don't react to you because you attacked them. They react because you exist without pretending. You walk into spaces carrying nothing fake, nothing rehearsed, nothing borrowed. And suddenly the air feels hostile to people who survive on illusion. You don't say much. You don't need to. Your presence alone presses on the cracks they've been taping over for years. Here's what they won't admit. You are a mirror they never asked for. Not the kind that flatters, the kind that shows posture. Posture they've been slouching in emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You reflect back their insecurity, their shortcuts, their compromises. And instead of fixing themselves, they aim their anger at the reflection. That's always how it goes. People don't hate the mirror, they hate what it reveals. You didn't embarrass them, their mask failed under real light. You didn't threaten their status, their image couldn't survive comparison. When something solid enters a room, everything hollow starts echoing. That's why energy shifts when you arrive. That's why jokes stop landing. That's why fake confidence suddenly looks shaky. You didn't change the room, you exposed it. They'll call you intense, cold, too quiet, too confident, too distant. Translation: you don't play along, you don't over-explain. You don't bend to keep people comfortable, and that drives them insane. People who rely on noise feel attacked by silence. People who rely on approval feel challenged by self-respect. Your calm isn't weakness, it's pressure. Ever notice how they claim to dislike you, but somehow know everything about you? That's not coincidence. That's fixation wearing a disguise. They study what they can't control. They talk about you because talking is the only power they have left. If they really didn't care, your name wouldn't show up in conversations you never joined. Here's a metaphor they'd hate because it fits too well. You're a clear glass of water in a room full of dyed drinks. Nobody needs to ask which one is real, and nobody pouring artificial color wants to sit next to transparency. It makes the additives obvious. So instead of changing their formula, they call the water boring or dangerous or too much. Anything but honest. And let's answer the question that's probably already forming in your mind. Why does this keep happening no matter where you go? New place, same tension. New people, same weird energy. It's not bad luck, it's consistency. You carry the same truth everywhere. And truth is disruptive in environments built on performance. They'll say you're arrogant when you're just grounded. They'll say you think you're better when you simply stopped shrinking. That's projection. People accuse you of what they secretly fear. You've become independent, unbothered, self-contained, not begging for validation. That kind of freedom feels like an attack to people who need applause to breathe. You don't mirror their chaos back to them. You don't match their volume. You don't scramble to explain yourself. That refusal is louder than any argument. It tells them you're not on their level of insecurity anymore, and that terrifies them. Not because you're cruel, but because you're unreachable. Here's the part they never expect. You're not trying to be special, you're just being honest. And honesty has weight. It bends rooms, it shifts dynamics, it exposes pecking orders that only worked when everyone agreed to pretend. The universe doesn't reward pretending forever. Eventually, something real walks in, and the game glitches. They feel judged around you, even when you haven't said a word. That's because integrity has a way of asking questions without speaking. Your presence silently asks, "Why aren't you living fully?" And instead of answering that question, they resent the one who triggered it. Let's be clear, you're not perfect. That's not the point. You're real. You own your flaws. You don't hide behind a character. And that authenticity makes people who are performing feel naked. So they label you the problem. They gossip. They distort. They try to shrink you down to a size they can manage. But notice this. They never ignore you. They never forget you. They never move on cleanly because you didn't just pass through their world. You disrupted their internal balance. You became a reference point, someone they measure themselves against when no one's watching. They might say you're nothing special, yet react like everything changes when you enter. That contradiction is your proof. People don't feel threatened by nothing. They don't strategize around someone insignificant. They don't whisper about someone invisible. Your impact speaks even when you don't. You didn't crack them. You revealed the cracks. You didn't steal their peace. You showed them they never had it. And instead of rebuilding themselves, they try to paint you as the villain. That's easier than growth. That's safer than accountability. So, if you've been wondering whether it's in your head, whether you're imagining the tension, whether you should dim yourself to keep the peace, hear this clearly. The discomfort you trigger isn't your responsibility. It's feedback. Feedback that you're aligned, that you're solid, that you're walking straight in a crooked space. You're not here to be liked by people who survive on pretending. You're here to be real in a world addicted to filters. And that will always come with resistance. Not because you're wrong, but because you're undeniable. They can talk, they can twist, they can watch from the sidelines. None of that changes the core truth. You're the reflection they can't crack. And every time they see you, they're forced to face the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. That's not a curse, that's power. Number 2, you're the receipt they don't want to read. Calling it luck is the fastest way to forgive yourself for quitting. That's the lie they hide behind. And you stand there like proof it doesn't work anymore. They didn't fail because the universe was unfair. They failed because they paused too long, doubted too much, and chose comfort when pressure showed up. You didn't get handed anything. You kept moving while they kept explaining. And now your existence ruins the story they tell themselves at night. They say you were lucky because luck sounds harmless. Luck doesn't ask questions. Luck doesn't demand accountability, but effort does. Discipline does. Endurance does. And you carry all 3 in your posture, in your timing, in the way you don't flinch when things get hard. If they admitted that, they'd have to face the truth that scares them most. They could have tried harder. Imagine this. 2 people stand at the edge of a storm. One complains about the rain and waits for better weather. The other steps into it, soaked, shaking, but moving anyway. When the second one reaches the other side stronger, the first calls it good timing. That's how excuses survive. They dress themselves up as reason. You didn't rise because conditions were perfect. You rose because you moved when conditions were terrible. While they were waiting for motivation, you worked without it. While they were planning, you were learning through impact. While they were protecting their ego, you were risking failure openly. That gap between you didn't appear overnight. It grew every day. They chose comfort, and you chose progress. Here's a question you might be asking yourself right now. Why do they downplay your effort instead of acknowledging it? Because admitting your grind forces them to face their own inactivity. It's easier to rewrite your story than to rewrite their habits. So they call your work luck. They call your discipline timing. They call your growth connections. Anything except what it really was, earned. Imagine watching someone climb a mountain you gave up on halfway. You wouldn't want to hear about their blisters, their falls, their fear. You'd want to believe they had a shortcut. You didn't. That's what they're doing to you. They don't want the truth, because the truth asks too much of them. You didn't make it look easy. You made quitting look obvious. That's why your progress bothers them. You didn't just succeed, you removed their alibi. Every step forward you took quietly erased another excuse they were clinging to. They told themselves they were waiting for the right moment. You proved there is no right moment. There's only movement. Let's talk about pain because this matters. They think pain disqualifies people. You proved pain refines them. While they avoided discomfort, you learned inside it. While they backed away from pressure, you adapted to it. Pain didn't stop you, it trained you. And now they can't stand looking at the finished version without acknowledging the cost. Imagine a blade left untouched, dull but safe, versus one sharpened by friction. Friction hurts, it grinds, it strips material away, but it creates something effective. You didn't avoid friction, you leaned into it. And now you cut through situations they still struggle to enter. They'll ask questions they already know the answers to. How did you do it? Who helped you? What was your secret? But they don't really want the truth, because the truth sounds boring and demanding. Consistency, sacrifice, long nights, quiet losses, starting again when no one was watching. That's not glamorous enough for people addicted to shortcuts. Excuses sound smart until someone proves they weren't necessary. That's you standing there breathing proof, and that's why conversations about you always feel tense. You didn't win by cheating the system, you won by enduring it. And endurance makes laziness uncomfortable. Imagine this again. A person sitting on the couch criticizing a runner crossing mile 20. The runner is exhausted, injured, but still moving. The critic feels powerful for a moment until they realize they've never tested themselves that way. That realization hurts more than envy. It exposes fear. You didn't just reach a destination, you became evidence. Evidence that waiting was optional. Evidence that effort compounds. Evidence that fear can be outpaced. And once evidence exists, excuses start collapsing. They'll say, "You had it easier." They weren't there for the nights you questioned yourself. They weren't there for the moments you almost quit. They didn't see the internal battles, the restarts, the rebuilding. They only see the outcome. And outcomes without context make weak minds defensive. Here's another truth they won't say out loud. If they acknowledged your grind, they'd have to admit they chose comfort over courage. That's a heavy thing to sit with. So, they avoid it. They gossip instead. They minimize instead. They pretend you're an exception instead of an example. You didn't get ahead because you were special. You became special because you didn't stop. That line scares them because it means nothing was stopping them except themselves. You may wonder if you should explain your journey to make them understand. Don't. People who benefit from misunderstanding, you won't listen anyway. Your life already answered every question they pretend to ask. Your consistency already explained everything. And let's be clear, this isn't about arrogance, it's about accuracy. You know what it took. You know what it cost. You don't need applause from people who weren't there. You don't need validation from people who gave up early. Imagine a bridge built plank by plank while others laughed from the shore. Once the bridge stands, they call it luck. They forget the hours. They forget the splinters. They forget the weight you carried. That's fine. The bridge still works. Your role now isn't to convince them, it's to continue. Every step you take forward quietly rewrites the rules they hoped would protect them. You don't have to say a word. Your movement does the talking. So when they reduce your work to luck, hear what they're really saying. I couldn't do what you did. That's not your burden to carry. That's their mirror moment. You are proof. Excuses are just pretty lies. People tell themselves to sleep at night, and every time you keep going, you expose that lie a little more. Number 3, you're the puzzle that makes them angry. They don't hate you. They hate that you don't come with instructions. That's the real irritation. You didn't just break their expectations, you escaped their understanding. They're used to patterns, predictable reactions, copy-paste personalities. You walked in without a label, without a script, without a need to explain yourself, and that short-circuited them. People get calm around what they understand. They get hostile around what they can't decode. You've probably noticed it. The staring, the subtle questions, the way they mimic your tone, your habits, your timing. Like studying a lock, hoping one more look will make it open. But there is no key. You weren't built from a template. You were shaped by pressure they avoided and choices they postponed. Imagine this. Someone tries to reverse engineer a storm by watching the rain. They'll never get it. The power isn't in the drops. It's in the conditions that created them. You are those conditions. Quiet resilience, repeated rebuilding, learning how to stay steady when things fall apart. That's not something you copy, that's something you survive. They assume there must be a trick, a shortcut, a hidden advantage. Because accepting the truth is uncomfortable. The truth is, you kept going when quitting would have been easier. You adapted instead of collapsing. You rebuilt in silence while they needed noise and validation just to start. That calm you carry isn't an act, it's muscle memory. You confuse them because you didn't become bitter where others broke. That line hits because it's accurate. They expect damage to look loud, angry, obvious. Yours looks focused, clean, controlled, and that messes with their heads. They search for your weak point like it's a missing screw. They don't find one, so they invent stories instead. Imagine copying someone's handwriting without knowing the language. It might look similar, but it won't make sense. That's what happens when they imitate you. They copy the surface, not the source. The result feels off because it is off. You're not a vibe, you're a process. You might wonder why this turns into irritation instead of admiration. Simple answer: respect requires humility. And humility is expensive. It costs ego. So instead of asking how you grew, they act like you're strange. Instead of learning from you, they label you unpredictable. You're not hard to understand, you're just not shallow. That's the part they don't want to admit. Depth frustrates people who live on shortcuts. You don't react fast. You don't explain yourself on demand. You don't perform your growth. You live it. And living it quietly makes observers nervous. So if you felt watched, studied, or oddly misunderstood, relax. That's not danger. That's evidence. You've outgrown the language they speak. And when people can't translate you, they don't walk away. They stare, copy, guess, and get mad. Let them. You're not here to be decoded. You're here to move forward. Number 4. You're the glitch they can't patch. You didn't break the system. You revealed how broken it already was. That's why your presence feels dangerous to them. You don't play the silent games that keep weak systems alive. You don't nod along to nonsense just to be accepted. You don't trade your standards for a seat at a fake table. And in a world held together by unspoken lies, that kind of honesty hits like a power surge. Most environments survive on agreement, not truth. Smile here, stay quiet there. Pretend you didn't notice the disrespect. Everyone follows the script because it keeps things smooth. Then you show up and refuse to read your lines. You don't attack anyone, you don't raise your voice, you just stop participating in the lie. And suddenly everything feels unstable. Imagine a room full of tangled wires that somehow still powers the lights. It works because no one touches it. Everyone agrees to avoid asking questions. Then one person, driven by curiosity, flips the switch. Sparks burst, smoke fills the air, and panic spreads. Not because the switch was wrong, but because the wiring was never solid to begin with. That person is you. And for that, they'll call you difficult, intense, even arrogant. That's how fragile systems protect themselves. It's always easier to blame the spark than to admit the entire setup was unstable. You didn't create the chaos, you exposed it. The unease they feel isn't really about you. It's about finally seeing what they managed to ignore for so long. And that realization is uncomfortable. Why do they react so strongly when all you're doing is being genuine? Because truth removes their cover. When you speak directly, their half-truths lose weight. When you stay grounded, their performative confidence starts to wobble. When you refuse to participate in the illusion stops functioning. Your calmness unsettles them more than any outburst ever could. Anger can be brushed aside. Truth forces adjustment. You don't give them noise to hide behind. You give them clarity. And clarity demands change. Picture someone carefully holding a house of cards together for years, every movement controlled. Then a window opens. The collapse isn't caused by the wind, it's caused by the structure itself. You didn't create the breeze, you simply stopped sealing the room shut. They expect compliance. You bring consistency. They expect silence. You bring honesty. And that alone disrupts everything they built around assumption. Suddenly, the unspoken rules stop working. The hierarchy no longer feels certain. The roles people relied on start to blur. And what was ignored can no longer be unseen. You don't disturb peace. You reveal where peace was only an illusion. That's the part they resist accepting, because it means the problem was never you. You're not reckless. You're aligned. And alignment doesn't negotiate with dysfunction. It exposes it simply by standing still. You didn't break anything that deserved to survive. You simply refused to power a system that ran on quiet betrayal. Disruption always comes before repair. And you are proof that the old way can't continue untouched. Number 5. You slipped out of their hands, and now they're panicking. When control disappears, gossip shows up to replace it. That's exactly what's happening. The noise didn't start because you changed into something worse. It started because you stopped being easy to manage. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped reacting on cue. You stopped giving people access to your emotions whenever they felt entitled to them. And the moment the strings went slack, panic set in. People who were comfortable pulling you closer or pushing you away suddenly can't do either. They can't provoke you, they can't guilt you, they can't bait you into old patterns. So they do the only thing left. They rewrite the story. Rumors become their last attempt at influence, not because they care, but because they lost their grip. Your peace is what really rattles them. Calm people are impossible to manipulate. When you don't rush to defend yourself, insecure minds fill the silence with assumptions. When you set boundaries, they call it cold. When you protect your time, they call it selfish. That's how entitlement reacts when access gets revoked. Imagine a remote control that suddenly stops working. The device isn't broken. The batteries are just gone. That's you. You didn't turn hostile. You powered down the parts of yourself they used to press. And now they keep smashing buttons, frustrated that nothing responds. You didn't become distant. You became unreachable to nonsense. That's the shift they can't stand. Before, your emotions were predictable, your reactions were familiar. Now there's a pause, a calm, a refusal to engage. And that silence feels like disrespect to people who relied on your availability to feel important. They'll label your growth as arrogance, your confidence as ego, your self-respect as pride. Not because it's true, but because those labels soften the blow of losing control. It's easier to say you changed for the worse than to admit they benefited from the old version of you. Here's the part you might be questioning. Why do they talk more now that you give them less? Because attention is currency. When they can't get it directly, they try to earn it indirectly by keeping your name alive, by stirring reactions, by hoping something pulls you back into the old dynamic. They don't miss you, they miss access. That line explains everything. They don't miss your presence, they miss your permission, your patience, your willingness to tolerate what you shouldn't have. Losing that feels like rejection, even when it's just self-respect. So if the stories get louder as you stay quieter, don't flinch. That's confirmation, not consequence. Control doesn't disappear quietly. It throws tantrums on the way out. And you walking away calmly is the loudest statement you could have made. They can talk all they want. The truth already moved on without them. Number 6. Your calm makes their noise look desperate. Silence scares people who only exist when they're loud. That's why your stillness gets under their skin. You're not competing for attention. You're not explaining yourself. You're not rushing to be seen. And somehow that makes you impossible to ignore, while everyone else performs, reacts, overtalks, and overshares. You sit grounded. That contrast exposes how frantic the noise really is. They assume your piece was gifted to you, like it just showed up one day, fully formed. They don't see the cost because the cost was paid in private. The nights you broke down without an audience, the walks you took alone when no one checked in, the moments you chose restraint over reaction. Stillness isn't passive, it's trained. Imagine a crowded room where everyone is shouting to be heard and one person stays quiet. Guess who people keep looking at? Not because they're weak, but because calm has gravity, chaos spins, stillness anchors, and insecure people hate anything they can't pull into their storm. You're not silent because you're empty. You're silent because you're full. That's the difference they miss. You don't chase validation because you already did the internal work. You don't rush to prove yourself because you survived what already proved you. Your calm isn't avoidance, it's containment. And containment looks threatening to people who leak emotion everywhere. Here's the question you might be asking yourself. Why do they misread your boundaries as coldness? Because boundaries end access, and people who benefited from your openness feel exposed when it closes. Your boundaries aren't walls, they're filters. You didn't shut people out. You stopped letting everyone in. Imagine pouring water into cups with holes. Eventually you stop pouring, not out of cruelty, but clarity. You didn't cut people off for no reason. You stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't help you heal. Your silence is loud because it refuses to entertain nonsense. That's why they project onto it. They call you distant, proud, unapproachable. But what they're really reacting to is restraint. You no longer respond to everything. You choose. And choice feels like rejection to people addicted to access. You're not still because nothing moves inside you. You're still because you learned when movement wastes energy. And that discipline makes noise look childish. So stay calm. Let them shout. Let them spin stories. Your quiet presence already said everything that needed to be said. Number 7. You walked your own way and broke their scoreboard. You didn't lose their approval. You outgrew the need for it. That's the part they can't digest. You didn't wait to be picked. You didn't angle yourself to fit their expectations. You didn't stand in line hoping someone would finally nod at you. You chose alignment over applause. And the moment you did, everything shifted. Not just for you, but for them too. They followed rules they never questioned, climbed ladders they didn't design, chased titles, roles, labels, and permission slips that promised safety but delivered nothing real. You stepped away from that game. You asked a different question. Not, will they accept me, but does this actually fit me? And that one decision quietly dismantled the whole system. Imagine a race where everyone is sprinting in the same direction, exhausted, desperate to win. Then someone calmly exits the track and starts walking another way. No crowd, no cheers, just clarity. That's you. And suddenly the race looks ridiculous to the people still running. You didn't rebel, you aligned. And alignment doesn't ask for votes. That's why your progress feels offensive to them. You didn't need consensus. You didn't need validation. You didn't wait for permission to become yourself. You stopped saying no to your instincts. You stopped shrinking to keep things comfortable. And once you did that, momentum followed. Here's the uncomfortable truth they avoid. If your path works without approval, then approval was never the requirement. And that means all the begging, performing, and compromising they did might have been unnecessary. That realization hits harder than jealousy. It questions their entire strategy. You might wonder why this makes people defensive instead of curious. Because curiosity requires courage. It takes strength to admit you followed the wrong map. It's easier to mock the person who left than to question why you stayed. Imagine building a house by the ocean while everyone else insisted the only safe place was inland. When the view turns out better and the structure holds, the crowd doesn't applaud. They criticize the location. That's what they're doing to you. Your freedom isn't arrogance. It's proof you trusted yourself. And that trust is what separates you now. You don't move for approval. You move with intention. You don't chase crowds. You build alignment. And alignment always wins in the long run because it doesn't depend on anyone else staying convinced. They can keep their scorecards. You already left the game. Number 8. You're the frequency they can't steal. They pretend they're done with you, yet they never stop tuning in. That contradiction says everything. People don't monitor what they've moved on from. They don't study what no longer matters. What you're seeing isn't hate. It's fixation trying to save face. They watch your moves, your timing, your shifts, then laugh out loud as if they're unaffected. That laugh is cover. Obsession hates being exposed. They mock first because mockery feels safer than admiration. Admitting you're real would force them to admit they're empty. So they joke, they downplay, they roll their eyes. Then they quietly imitate what they think they can pull off. Style, words, attitude, but it never lands. Because energy isn't cosmetic, it's lived. Imagine trying to photocopy a heartbeat. You can copy the shape, not the pulse. That's what they're doing with you. They grab fragments and hope no one notices the missing depth. The result always feels flat, forced, slightly wrong. Because what makes you magnetic wasn't learned. It was earned. You're not special because you shine. You shine because you survived. That's the part they can't replicate. You didn't get your energy from trends or validation. You forged it in silence. Pressure shaped it. Loss refined it. Growth stabilized it. That kind of presence doesn't fade when attention leaves. It stays consistent. And consistency feels unreal to people who only perform. Here's the question that might be crossing your mind. Why do they orbit instead of walking away? Because real energy wakes people up. Even if they don't like what they see, it reminds them what's missing inside themselves. You're not entertainment, you're contrast. And contrast is addictive. Imagine static filling a radio channel, noise everywhere. Then one clear signal cuts through. You don't have to boost it. People naturally tune in. That's you. You don't chase relevance. You carry clarity, and clarity is rare. They watch because you remind them who they stopped becoming. That's the quiet truth. They deny it publicly, but privately your presence lingers. They scroll back. They check updates. They keep tabs. Not to compete, to feel something real again. So let them orbit, let them observe. You're not responsible for what they can't become. You're the signal. And signals don't argue with static. They just stay clear. Number 9. You're the exit sign they stare at instead of the fire. They talk about you because silence forces them to face themselves. That's the part they don't want to admit. Your name isn't the issue. Their reflection is when things get quiet, when distractions run out, when the noise fades and they're left alone with their own thoughts. That's when discomfort hits. Instead of sitting with it, they reach for you. Your name becomes their escape hatch. You didn't volunteer for this role. You didn't ask to be their emotional detour. But every time their own life feels heavy, unfinished, or disappointing, they pull attention away from it by pulling you into conversation. It's easier to dissect you than to examine themselves. Easier to criticize your choices than to confront their stagnation. Imagine a cracked mirror covered with sticky notes. As long as the notes stay up, no one has to look at the damage underneath. You're one of those notes to them, a distraction they slap onto their discomfort so they don't have to deal with what's actually wrong. They don't study your life. They borrow it to avoid their own. That's why the focus feels strange. It's not admiration, it's avoidance. They're not invested in where you're going. They're invested in not looking at where they're stuck. Talking about you fills space. It delays accountability. It gives them something external to blame, analyze, or exaggerate. You might wonder why they paint you as the problem while clearly staying obsessed. Because if you're the issue, they don't have to be. Making you the villain lets them remain the victim. It's psychological self-defense, not truth. Imagine someone sitting in a dark room with a single window. Instead of turning on the light, they keep staring outside. That's you. A view that feels easier than fixing what's broken inside. But staring doesn't solve anything. It just postpones reality. You're not haunting them. They're avoiding themselves. That distinction matters. You didn't invade their thoughts. You triggered them by moving forward. Your growth highlighted their pause. Your calm made their chaos louder. And instead of adjusting, they fixated. So if it feels like you're being talked about unfairly, remember this. People rarely obsess over others who are doing worse than them. They fixate on those who remind them of choices they didn't make. You're not their enemy. You're their reminder. And reminders hurt when ignored too long. Number 10. You lived the life they only daydreamed about. You did what they kept rehearsing in their head and never dared to try. That's the wound they're protecting. You didn't just succeed, you moved. While they stayed frozen at the edge of their own potential, you jumped. Not because you were fearless, but because you were tired of standing still. And the moment you did, you became a walking reminder of everything they postponed. They had the same ideas, the same urges, the same moments where something inside them whispered, "Go now." But they waited for permission, for reassurance, for the perfect setup that never arrived. You didn't wait. You acted with uncertainty in your hands and doubt in your chest. That difference changed everything. Imagine two people staring at the same open door. One keeps asking what's on the other side. The other walks through and figures it out along the way. When the second one comes back stronger, the first says the door was rigged. That's what they're doing to you. You didn't steal their dream. You survived the risk they avoided. That's why they twist your story. If they told it honestly, it would sound too close to their own missed chances. So they edit. They say you changed. They say you got lucky. They say you weren't always like this. Anything to avoid admitting that courage was the missing ingredient. You might ask yourself why they rewrite your past instead of celebrating your growth. Because rewriting you protects them. If your progress looks fake, then their hesitation looks reasonable. If your courage looks reckless, then their fear looks smart. Pride depends on distortion when truth threatens it. Imagine someone watching a movie they always wanted to star in. Scene after scene, they recognize themselves in the lead, but they're stuck in the audience. Instead of applauding, they criticize the plot. That's their coping mechanism. You became proof that the life they wanted required action, not excuses. That's the line they can't erase. You didn't have more clarity than them. You had more willingness. Willingness to fail, willingness to look foolish, willingness to start before you felt ready. And now that version of you walks around freely, while the version of them they could have been stays trapped in regret. So when they undermine your growth, don't take it personally. They're not fighting you, they're wrestling with the ghost of who they never became. And every time you keep living honestly, that ghost gets louder. You didn't become better than them, you became braver. And bravery always makes hesitation uncomfortable. Number 11. You stepped off their stage and ruined the play. You became the villain the moment you stopped playing your assigned role. That's what actually happened. There was a script everyone silently agreed to follow. Who stays quiet? Who tolerates what? Who absorbs disrespect and calls it peace? You were supposed to nod, smile, swallow things and keep the illusion intact. The moment you didn't, the whole performance started wobbling. You didn't expose them by shouting, you exposed them by refusing to lie anymore. You asked questions they hoped would never be asked. You named feelings they depended on staying buried. You stopped pretending things were fine just to keep the room calm. And in spaces built on pretending, truth always looks like betrayal. Imagine a group playing a card game where everyone cheats quietly and agrees not to call it out. Then one person flips the table and says, "This isn't real." Suddenly, that person isn't honest. They're disruptive, rude, dangerous. Not because they broke the rules, but because they revealed there were no real rules to begin with. You didn't break the peace. You broke the silence that protected the lie. That's why the reaction feels extreme. You didn't attack anyone. You stopped attacking yourself in private. You stopped carrying discomfort alone, so others could stay comfortable. And that shift changed the power balance. People who benefited from your silence felt exposed the moment you spoke honestly. You might wonder why telling the truth made you the villain instead of the hero. Because honesty threatens systems built on denial. It forces choices, adjustments, accountability. And most people don't want growth if it costs them comfort. Imagine a cracked wall hidden behind a painting for years. Everyone knows it's there, but no one mentions it. Then someone takes the painting down. The crack didn't appear that day. It was always there, but now it can't be ignored. Guess who gets blamed? You didn't hurt anyone. You stopped bleeding quietly. That line matters. You weren't cruel. You were clear. You didn't lash out. You drew lines. And lines feel aggressive to people who were used to stepping over you. They needed you compliant, predictable, manageable. You choosing truth disrupted the balance they relied on. So they rewrote the story, made you the problem, painted you as difficult. It's easier than admitting they preferred you hurting in silence. So if you've been labeled the bad guy for finally being honest, understand this. You didn't change into something wrong. You stepped out of a role that was costing you too much. And any script that requires your suffering to keep others comfortable deserved to be torn up. You didn't ruin the play. You escaped it. Number 12. You're the error message they can't silence. You won without permission, and that terrifies them. That's the core of it. You didn't follow the blueprint they swore by. You didn't obey the unspoken rules. You didn't sacrifice yourself to fit inside their system. And yet, you still moved forward. That alone breaks their logic. When someone wins without playing the game starts looking fake. Their system was built on trade-offs. Blend in and be accepted. Stay quiet and be rewarded. Obey first, live later. You ignored all of that, not out of rebellion, but out of clarity. You chose alignment over obedience, and somehow the results came anyway. That's the glitch they can't explain. Imagine a machine designed to reward only one type of input. Everyone feeds it the same thing and waits for the same output. Then you walk up, put in something completely different, and it still works. The machine freezes, lights blink, errors flash. That's you. Proof the system was never absolute. They whisper because whispers are safer than questions. Asking real questions would force them to admit they built their lives on rules that weren't real. So rather than challenging the structure itself, they end up questioning you. Instead of repairing the system, they label you as something abnormal. You didn't break the rules, you simply exposed that the rules were never as fixed as they claimed. That truth stings deeper than any defeat, because failure can always be blamed on lack of effort. This cannot. Your presence alone implies there were other choices available to them, and once that idea takes root, it refuses to disappear. That's why the whispers don't fade. Systems are built on predictability, and anything that disrupts that balance feels like an error. You didn't follow the expected path of struggle they believed was necessary. You moved beyond it, and that alone shakes more than their assumptions. It unsettles their sense of identity. Picture someone who followed a strict map their entire life, only to watch you arrive at the same place, guided by instinct alone. They won't call it success. They'll question the destination or doubt your honesty about the journey. Anything is easier than admitting the map they trusted might have been incomplete. You are not a flaw in the system. You are a contradiction it cannot reconcile. That's why your presence lingers in conversations you're not part of, and why your name keeps resurfacing where you are not. You didn't destroy the system, you revealed its boundaries. And once boundaries are seen, they cannot be unseen. That is why the whispers continue, not because you are loud, but because you are impossible to ignore. If this message stayed with you until the end, it wasn't random. Something in you recognized it before doubt could interfere. The attention you feel isn't imagined, and the shift you sensed wasn't accidental. You didn't force it, you triggered it simply by being authentic. Stay steady, stay aligned, keep moving while others keep talking. And if this message resonated with you, leave a like if you haven't already. If you're new here, consider subscribing to stay connected. This is only the beginning.